The kidnapper's deadline expired nearly 2 days ago. We still don't know what has happened to Christian Science Monitor reporter Jill Carroll. But her abduction reminds us of the story of another journalist taken hostage in Iraq about a year and a half ago. Martha Teichner reports our Sunday morning cover story.
To live the noblest tenets of his or her profession. Those are Jill Carroll's words, written a year ago, reprinted in a London newspaper last week. Her explanation for why a journalist, particularly a freelance journalist, would go to Iraq knowing the risks.
We met her in Baghdad, and she was actually the first person that I met out there when I arrived in May of 2004.
It's very difficult, for me personally, and as well for my family, to see this happening again.
For documentary filmmakers Micah, Garen and Marie-Helène Carlton, there is a chilling déjà vu quality to their friend Jill Carroll's story because of what happened to them in Iraq. A year and a half ago, Micah was kidnapped. Marie-Helène worked to free him. Their story had a happy ending, but no one knew at the time that it would.
You can see the moonscape that this site has become. All of this is not an excavation from an archaeological dig. These are looters' holes.
It was to document the looting that Marie-Helène and Micah went to southern Iraq.
This was the birthplace of history. This was where writing was invented.
Disguised as Iraqis, they were able to get disturbing pictures no one else has gotten. The failure of the United States or any other coalition country to stop the systematic theft and destruction of Iraq's cultural heritage was a story few journalists dared to touch.
Because in here, very dangerous.
You have to decide if this story is really important enough for you to go over there and risk your life. And for me, the story was absolutely important enough.
In southern Iraq during the summer of 2004, a Shiite militia called the Mahdi Army, loyal to this man, a radical cleric named Muqtada al-Sadr, was fighting American soldiers. A critical fact, it turns out, when Micah Garen and his translator Amir Doshi were kidnapped. It was August 13th, Friday the 13th.
A car drove up very quickly. There was one man in the car in the front who was just screaming at me in Arabic. He had a pistol and he was waving it and then pointing it in my face. You're just pumped full of adrenaline and you're desperately trying to figure some way to kind of get out of this. So the fear is there, but foremost in your mind is, how am I going to survive this? I actually managed to hang on to the blindfold that they used.
And so began their ordeal.
Frankly, I thought he was probably a goner.
Speaking from Baghdad, New York Times correspondent John Burns. Burns himself survived being kidnapped.
At that time, the odds against anybody who was kidnapped were very heavily against.
And nothing's changed. According to the New York Times, just 4 days ago, more than 400 foreigners have been kidnapped since 2003, and at least 36 journalists. Most foreigners have been released, but dozens have been killed.
In a country so volatile as this, every hostage is teetering on the edge of the abyss from the moment that he is seized.
I didn't find out for 3 days that Micah had been kidnapped.
Marie-Helène had left Iraq a few days before.
And I remember vividly getting on the plane and turning around to see Micah, and he waited and waited, and the last time I turned around, he wasn't there. He and Amir had left. And that was, when I look back, it seems very prophetic.
This is the packet of cigarettes that I found on my first night. I made a message to Marie-Helène, MH, Zug for dog Zugma, and then Love, which was scratched out in dirt. So when you're stripped of everything and you really are facing your mortality, you can clearly kind of reassess the situation. You say,
this is what's important.
Yeah, yeah, you know, it refocuses you on what really matters.
5:41 a.m., Micah's mom called me, and she said a journalist is missing in southern Iraq, and they think it's Micah. I fully accepted it, and I partly refused to believe it, or believe that anything bad would happen. And I kind of approached it as, well, okay, this is the news. We're going to do something about this.
Within hours, a group that came to be known as the Blob had assembled in this one-room apartment in New York City.
So we had about 9 friends and family members, the dog, and then starting Monday night, the FBI agents.
They posted the telephone numbers of every journalist, every diplomat, every sheikh who might be able to convince the kidnappers to free Micah and Amir. And with Marie-Hélène taking the lead, they started calling.
It's important immediately to get the word out very publicly that this person who's been kidnapped is a journalist, not a spy.
Ann Cooper is executive director of the Committee to Protect Journalists, whose members on the ground in Baghdad were enlisted to work their Iraqi sources on Micah's behalf.
You know, I've talked to war correspondents who covered Vietnam, Bosnia, many other conflicts, and they say, I've never seen anything like this.
We went out for the first time for a walk on Wednesday afternoon.
Marie-Helène was abruptly called back home.
I saw my sister standing outside the apartment with her hands on the railing looking down. And I walked into the apartment and I heard screaming. And I turned to my sister who was right behind me and she said, what's going on? And no one spoke. And my sister said, there's a video.
I mean, it's your worst nightmare. There were about a dozen militants standing there with guns, and I could see there were banners on the wall written in Arabic, and there was a stool in the center where they had a video camera. And you know, I'd seen this, you know, plenty of times before. It had become, you know, the stage set that they used to execute people.
To think of Micah in that position where others had been, where there had been no hope, it was too painful to imagine, and I feel like part of me separated from my body because it was too painful. You just couldn't take it.
The kidnappers' threat? If U.S. forces didn't pull out of Najaf within 48 hours, Micah Garen would be killed. Najaf happened to be the place where the militant religious leader Muqtada al-Sadr was holed up inside a mosque under siege. With the media outside and the clock ticking, it was time for a desperate gamble.
We, the family, are hopeful for a positive outcome.
People are very nervous about issuing public statements because once it's out there, you know, it can go in any direction.
Micah's sister Eva was terrified, but her appearance on an Arab television station was one last chance to reach the powerful Shiite clerics who could order the hostages' release. The tiniest hint that maybe there was movement was, of all things, another video.
I'm an American journalist in Iraq, and
Micah was still alive. There were no men with guns behind him. And 2 important sheikhs had issued statements condemning the kidnappings. One was Muqtada al-Sadr himself. Supposedly, Micah's release was imminent, except that it wasn't.
It's a roller coaster ride, which is altogether more likely to end at the bottom than at the top. So even when we had statements from Muqtada al-Sadr, I wouldn't have given you more than, say, 1 chance in 3 at that point that Micah would return alive.
For 2 more days, nothing happened. And then
An American kidnapped and threatened with death by Iraqi militants was today set free by his captors.
The end finally came late Sunday night.
The head of the FBI group opened the door and he gave us a thumbs up and he said, "He's home." And that was, I think we fell down and jumped up at the same time. And
then the call.
And then the phone call. My cell phone rang and Micah was calling.
What was it like?
It felt like a miracle.
But there was one small problem.
I knew at some point he'd see the media reports and that he would see that it was reported he had a fiancé, and I didn't want him to feel freaked out by it or pressured or anything else. And then I started to explain why fiancé, and Micah just cut me off and he said, "Well..."
Micah Garen does live with his fiancée.
So I said, "Really?" And he said, "Really?"
And this was my strange satellite phone proposal.
The book Micah and Marie-Helène have written about those 10 awful days was their version of therapy. But it was not enough to blunt the impact of Jill Carroll's kidnapping.
I was there myself in front of that camera. It's a very tough thing to see, but it's when I see the video of her, I'm actually heartened because I see that she's being very strong.
Jill Carroll has written that she was willing to risk everything in Iraq for love of the story. Micah Garen and Marie-Helène Carlton, of all people, understand.